That year, when hunger drove me mad, I was digging through trash cans in the busiest district of the capital, when I heard that a big shot was visiting. I cleaned myself up and begged him for a chance. He found me beautiful and turned me into a top-tier star in the country, but warned me not to fall in love with anyone. At the award ceremony, I was on top of the world, ignoring all the advice. I proposed to him in front of the audience. He frowned, and the next day, he announced his engagement to his fiancée. Amidst the mocking and ridicule, I picked up the phone to call a friend overseas. You were right. I should go out and see the world. Chapter 1. Luna, have you thought this through? Once you leave, coming back will mean he's a married man. My friend also felt my giving up was a pity, considering all the years I had spent working tirelessly. Driven by my pursuit of Gabriel, I tried to raise myself to a level where I could stand beside him, but I forgot that someone like him would never marry someone who made a public spectacle of herself. I weakly smiled at the person on the other end of the line. It doesn't matter. I tried, and I have no regrets. The past few years had been tough. I would sleep in the hotel until 3 in the morning and wake up at 6 to put on makeup, turning myself into a spinning top. In the summer, I'd wade through polluted water. And in the winter, I'd run up mountains wearing only a skirt. I'd long since developed a whole set of health issues from the cold. Being a star, I couldn't afford to show any emotions. I had to keep my frustrations in check, or it would create resentment from others. I forced myself to keep climbing upward, which was far better than rummaging through trash for food. Every day, I woke up in the hotel full of fighting spirit. That time, I wasn't wearing protective gear and fell off the horse, ending up in the hospital. Gabriel showed his first signs of caring for me. I saw the ice melting away, and I excitedly jumped up in the hospital bed to show him how well I was doing. Gabriel took me back to my small apartment, ignoring my injuries, and insisted on staying with me. That night, his eyes were full of pity for me. My face turned red, as if I could melt away from embarrassment, while he kept calling my name, Luna. By morning, I was back to square one. There was comfort money left on the pillow. He left in a hurry, eager to distance himself from what had happened the previous night. The money slapped me in the face. The feeling of helplessness and shame made me silent for a long time, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. So I carefully folded the bills and placed them in a small box to keep. It was from him. After all, I tidied up the mess, erasing every trace of his presence. One word of concern from him, and I was ready to risk everything for him. This time, I gathered enough courage, and I was determined to leave. After a long silence, I coughed a few times. The voice on the phone sounded reassuring. How long do you need to get ready? 3 days. I'll buy the ticket and rent you an apartment. Okay. Chapter 2. When I decided to leave, the first thing I dealt with was the small box full of money. This heavy box used to be my sweet memory. Now, it represented my shame. I transferred the money to a bank card and decided to send it to Gabriel in 3 days. The apartment was spotless after I cleaned it, and the landlord was regretful when she learned I was moving out. Seeing how well I had tidied up, she even returned my entire deposit, which solved my immediate problem. At the company, I pretended not to notice the whispers behind my back and continued with the handover. Everyone was tacitly aware of the relationship between me and the boss, so they never made things difficult for me, assuming I was just heartbroken and needed time to get away. The handover went smoothly, but as I was about to leave, I ran into Gabriel. As he passed by, he stared at me without looking away. After we brushed past each other, he called me into his office. I watched his straight back and cursed under my breath. Reluctantly, I entered the office, feeling the eyes of my colleagues on me, guessing I hadn't gotten over my old feelings and was still clinging to him. If only he could consider me a little, I might have been able to maintain some dignity. What was that proposal on stage yesterday? Were you threatening me? He tapped the desk with his pen, clearly in a bad mood. It meant nothing. I was talking to someone else, just having a bit of fun. The smoke in the room was thick, making me cough uncontrollably. From shooting scenes in cold water, I had developed a cough whenever I smelled smoke. He frowned, put out the cigarette, and walked over to question me. Who are you interested in? Didn't I tell you not to get attached to anyone? Why didn't you listen? He was standing too close, and the minty smell from his cigarette irritated my throat. When I didn't answer, he lost his temper again. Don't let me find out you're multitasking. You shouldn't have any heart at all. I stopped moving, and he shifted his tone. I heard you're going abroad? Knowing I couldn't hide it anymore, I nodded. A faint hope blossomed in my heart. Would he ask me to stay? Chapter 3. We stayed in silence for a few minutes, neither of us speaking. It was only when his phone rang that the stillness was broken. He glanced at the screen, quickly walked to the window to answer the call, and his voice became soothing. Okay, I'll do it your way. I'll come to pick you up soon. Once again, my expectations were dashed. I had become the unnecessary one in the room, with nowhere to escape. I had learned that they were a perfect match. Childhood sweethearts. I only hated that I didn't know earlier. Otherwise, I wouldn't have wasted so many years dreaming foolishly. I silently slapped myself twice in my heart. He hung up, and I broke the silence first. If you lose once, you lose for life. I'm going out for some fresh air. He glanced at his watch, standing at the top of the tallest building, looking down at the traffic below. He absent-mindedly said, "Sure, a walk might be good. When everything at home settles down, I'll visit you." There was no reluctance in his voice. He was probably already tired of this relationship. He was just waiting for me to suggest leaving. He stared out the window, refusing to make eye contact with me. I wanted to read his expression, to speak my mind, but the words got stuck in my throat, unable to come out. He couldn't wait any longer, and put on his coat to go meet his fiancée. I gathered my courage, grabbed his hand, and, after adjusting myself, asked in the calmest, most non-jealous tone, "Are you really planning to get married?" He frowned at my hand on his. Every time I mentioned his fiancée, he looked impatient. "When did it become your business?" I gently let go of his hand, clenched my fist, and broke my newly done nails. "Sorry, I overstepped. My apologies. I had intended to explain myself, to say I wasn't that desperate. I could accept his marriage and wish him happiness, but his attitude clearly made me feel like a scheming woman, and I knew there was no point in saying anything more. Chapter 4. Gabriel stopped in his tracks, twisted his neck, sighed, and then reluctantly gave me some time. He asked me to come over and massage his neck, using the moment to try and calm me down. "I'm really tired. Stop causing trouble and behave. Am I your pet cat?" He glared at me, slammed the door shut, and went off to meet his fiancée. Looking back at our first intimate moment, I realize it was his protective instincts triggered by pity. I was wearing a hospital gown, pale and fragile. He had never seen me like that before. Who would have thought that someone who used to dig through trash cans would also feel pain? It must have been a rare sight for him. Since then, he found it interesting. Once he tasted the sweetness, he kept coming back for more. Whenever he was under pressure, he would seek me out. When he was vulnerable, he would turn to me, and I secretly enjoyed knowing that I held a unique place in his heart. But his actions yesterday forced him to use the news of his engagement to snap me out of my delusion. That's when I realized he already had a fiancée whom he was protecting well. For all these years, I had been kept in the dark. The photo of him with his fiancée was something I saw behind his desk at the office. They were a perfect match, embracing each other tightly, an image that made others envious. It turned out that he, too, could fall for someone without guarding his heart, and hold someone else in his arms. Unlike me, who only got held when he needed me. Poor people can't complain, but they still have the right to make choices. This time, I could decide to leave on my own. Back in the lounge, I looked at my manager, who was playing a game, and coldly said, "You've known all along. Why didn't you stop me?" Every time Gabriel came looking for me, my manager would help cover it up, clearing the paparazzi around my apartment in advance. I had thought he was protecting me, but it turned out he was just covering for his boss. He gave me a glance from his game. "You're his pet bird. What's there to explain to you?" Sure enough, the dog understands its master's intent. Chapter 5. By the time I returned to the apartment, the gloom in my heart had cleared. All I had to do was wait for the day after tomorrow, and I would leave the city behind. In the years since I entered the industry, I had given all the money I earned to the company as payment for what Gabriel had done for me. I couldn't even afford my own house, and this tiny apartment, no bigger than a few dozen square meters, was the place he came to most often. He had once complained about the place being small and wanted to buy me a bigger one, but I had refused. Meeting him had already exhausted my luck, and asking for more would only make me despise myself even more. Losing myself meant I couldn't even summon the courage to pursue love. One day passed, and the online discussions about me hadn't quieted down. Which female celebrity proposes like that? Who is she? Did the guy agree to her? Nothing's been announced yet after a whole day. Probably some CEO. Looks like the goddess didn't succeed, or they would have announced it by now. As I flipped through the news, my fingers inadvertently clicked on the section about him. Unlike the cruel comments about me, underneath his photos with Bianca, there were nothing but well wishes. People called them husband and queen and asked when they would start trying for a baby, as if they were waiting to reincarnate into a new life. I closed my laptop, and my tears began to fall uncontrollably, unable to hold back. I sent him a message, just to see what he was doing at this hour. Why did you never stop me? Am I really that pathetic? Half an hour passed, and just as I thought he wouldn't reply, he called me. His voice was lowered, and his anger was deliberately suppressed, betraying the tension of the moment. Did I ever tell you not to contact me at night? On the other end, I could hear Bianca calling him to come eat. Before hanging up, he hurriedly said, "I'll come see you tomorrow. Be good." Chapter 6. I never expected that I would see him one more time before I left. By the time Gabriel arrived, my bags were already packed and ready to go. On the small apartment floor, only 2 suitcases were left. He sensed something was off, but couldn't quite figure out that I was about to leave. I was always so obedient. He looked around, clearly annoyed. "When are you coming back? You're only going for a few days. Why is everything packed up already?" I didn't answer and instead mocked him. "Did Bianca not satisfy you? Why come looking for me at a time like this?" He snapped, pushing me against the wall. "You're getting more and more out of line. Have you forgotten you were once a beggar? Don't think that just because I spoil you, you can do whatever you want." During filming, my cervical spine had become slightly deformed. He gripped my neck, just pressing on the spot where it hurt. The pain made me close my eyes, trying to hold back my emotions, feeling dizzy by the intense sensation. Gradually, his mouth pressed against mine, getting more forceful, and eventually, he picked me up and threw me onto the bed. He kissed me with a madness that seemed both like a release of anger and an attempt to ease his own stress. I clenched my teeth, silently enduring, not giving him another chance, my heart growing cold. In the end, he didn't get what he wanted. He turned away from the bed, furious, ready to leave. I thought he would force me, but he didn't. Before he left, I asked him, "If I didn't owe you anything, do you think there could be something between us?" He stood at the door, lit a cigarette, and didn't even look at me. "Stop thinking about pointless things. Go have fun for a couple of days. Then come back and take on another project. I'll get you a major award by the end of the year." I had wanted to say a proper goodbye, but I lowered my hand instead. Forget it. After all, we wouldn't see each other again, and he didn't need to remember me. Chapter 7. After he left, I collapsed on the bed, not even bothering to cover myself, just staring at the ceiling and waiting for dawn. In the morning, I packed my bags and completely said goodbye to the city I had called home for so many years. I boarded a flight to another country. I didn't have the courage to tell him that I wasn't a beggar, just a girl who had been drained by her family and had run away. Although, in some ways, that identity wasn't any more worthy. My parents exploited me to the fullest. No matter how hard I tried, I could never fill the hole they created. I severed all ties with them, coming to Beijing on my own to fight for my future. Once I had sorted out my basic survival, they immediately found me and took all my savings, like they were looting my house. I was left with no choice but to live off the scraps in one of the busiest districts of the capital. They say that the trash for rich people is enough to keep the poor alive for a long time. I had already figured out the best places to scavenge. I would wait there every day, after dinner, to see what people threw away. I collected their discarded cardboard, bags, and sometimes even cufflinks and gift bags. These items were in high demand online, and I barely scraped through the toughest time with them. When I was digging through the trash, the store clerks would stand at the door and laugh at me. I overheard them once, talking about a young heir who was coming. I didn't know who he was, but I knew I had value. I quickly cleaned myself up in the bathroom, put on my best shirt, and rolled up my sleeves. Despite the cold weather, the moment I saw Gabriel, I rushed towards him. If he gave me a chance to make something of myself, I would repay him tenfold. I succeeded, but every night I spent alone, the ridicule from the store clerks would still stick with me like thorns, even though they had laughed at me at the time. When Gabriel nodded, they could hardly wait to push me aside and take my place. When Gabriel brought me back, he had someone clean me up thoroughly. Then I was placed in an entertainment company. Starting from the bottom. Chapter 8. The opportunity's been given to you. If you can't become famous, you'll be working for me for the rest of your life. I gritted my teeth, persisting year after year, and finally reached where I am today. He doesn't know that I didn't keep any money for myself. I gave it all to the company. That was the one thing the agent had promised me. Now I'm broke, my landlord's money, my friends help to buy my flight ticket. As long as I'm still alive, I'll have the chance to make more. I dressed simply, looking nothing like a star. On the plane, I was about to drift off, hoping the music would help me sleep. But a familiar name startled me, making my headphones fall to the ground. Gabriel, don't worry. I'm just going out for a few days. I'll be back soon. Be good at home. Don't let me catch you doing anything strange. So, this was his fiancée, Bianca. No wonder they're a couple, they even talk the same way. I couldn't help but sigh at the irony of life. Wrapping myself tightly in my shawl, I didn't want to be seen by her. The girl sitting next to Bianca appeared to be her best friend, both dressed like wealthy young ladies. After Bianca hung up, she whispered something to her friend. You know he has someone else, and you still let him stay in the country? Be careful. That woman might take advantage of it. Bianca was quite open about it, not caring who overheard. In our circle, there's no such thing as sincerity. We all just keep our eyes shut and get by. He does his thing, and I'm just doing mine, right? She blew on her freshly done nails, exuding a sweet scent. When she saw me wrapped up, she and her friend glanced at me. Her friend mumbled, "Where did this beauty come from? She's even more beautiful than some stars." Bianca looked away, reclined her seat, and lay down. What's so special about being a star? Chapter 9. When she closed her eyes, I picked up my headphones, still thinking about the conversation I had overheard. What did heartthrob mean? What did doing our own thing mean? Had I discovered something? Just as I was hesitating, Bianca's phone rang again, almost catching me staring at her. It was Gabriel, calling to check if she had forgotten anything. She smiled sweetly, complimenting him for being obedient, then glanced at me and started whispering to her friend. The moment they finished their call, Gabriel called me. He knew I was flying abroad today, but not what time I was leaving. When I saw his call, I quickly hung up in shock. This was the first time I had hung up on him. He didn't give up, dialing over and over again. Bianca and her friend began to sense something was off, frequently glancing at me. I wrapped my shawl tighter and stared out the window. In no time, there were over a dozen missed calls. He was in the dark, and I felt guilty. I could only send him a message. Your fiancé is probably out of the country looking for another man. Mr. Liu, you might want to watch over your people. This time, there was no pause between his calls. I had no choice but to put on my headphones and answer quietly. On the other end, he practically spat fire at me. Where the hell are you? You're going out today and don't even plan to show up at the company? And you're not answering your phone? Once he stopped yelling, I calmly asked, "Did you see my message?" His tone shifted, weary and helpless. You don't need to worry about her. I know exactly what kind of person she is. You two never should have had anything to do with each other in the first place. I felt a knot in my chest. The words stuck, unable to rise or fall. He didn't believe me. and even thought my words came from jealousy. Do you need to hear it from her directly? He cut me off, then just asked, "Where are you?" "I'm coming to the apartment to see you." I knew he was just lonely. His fiancée had left, and now he was coming to find me. How pathetic I was. I hung up the phone and took out the SIM card. The plane finally took off. Chapter 10. By the time I got off the plane, the sky was already pitch black. I stretched my arms and legs, which had been cramped during the flight, feeling a sense of relief. Bianca and her friend walked quickly away, and as they passed, they bumped into me quite hard. Bianca, with great composure, softly said, "Sorry." She walked a few steps away, and that's when I saw her more clearly. She was wearing an ultra-short skirt, a crop top, and a white shirt thrown over it. This shirt was the one I had bought for him with the money I earned while still an unknown. Struggling in the film industry, it had an embroidered moon on it. It was the product of countless nights of practice, a piece I worked hard to create. Now, it was on her, and it looked beautiful. That moon danced mockingly in front of me, a symbol of my futile effort. It seemed they'd long since been sharing wardrobes. I dragged my suitcase and walked quickly, spotting my friend in the distance. Meanwhile, Bianca had already run toward a tall foreigner, blonde, blue-eyed, and incredibly handsome. I couldn't help but chuckle to myself at Gabriel's misfortune. My friend took my suitcase from me and gave my shoulders a quick squeeze. I moved a little away, feeling uncomfortable, and politely exchanged pleasantries with him. He stared at me intently. "Welcome, my Alice." Though we were friends, Ryan was my childhood companion. We went to school together, did homework together. We were the small phoenixes of the slums. Everyone envied us for our academic success. We were the most likely to make it out of there. We promised each other we'd grow up together, go to university together, and explore the world. But that year, during the college entrance exams, my mom was pregnant with my little brother, and to ensure someone would take care of her during her confinement, she changed my university plans. She made me forego all the universities I could have attended so I could stay home and look after her. The next year, after she gave birth, I begged her for another chance to take the exam. My homeroom teacher even came to my house, trying to convince her. After all, during that year of staying at home to take care of the baby, I never gave up studying. Chapter 11. As I expected, the result was just as I feared. No matter who came to our house, she would just lie in bed, nursing my brother, saying not a word, making everyone who came to plead with her feel embarrassed. She would rather let me waste my time at home than give me a chance to succeed. She didn't have what I had, and she believed I didn't deserve it either. I had no choice but to run away. I escaped little by little, working jobs, looking for opportunities to better myself. Whenever I felt down, it was Ryan who called to encourage me. He gave me the strength to keep going. When I learned he was going abroad to study, I raised a glass from afar to congratulate him. It felt like I was celebrating my own dream coming true. For kids like us from poor families, success was so difficult to attain. His departure felt like a loss for me. I told myself I could do it too. Now, I stood on this land as well, but with nothing, starting from scratch. He smiled and reached out his hand. "Superstar. What's next? Movies? Of course, I'll rely on my real talent to make a name here. What I already have. I won't give up." I started by doing small tasks on film sets, serving tea to the big-name stars, while simultaneously learning the language and honing my acting skills. Quickly, my optimistic and hardworking attitude helped me blend into the crew. They knew I was a star from China, and they were keen to talk to me about the differences between the domestic and foreign entertainment industries. Once, a role came up that required a tough Chinese girl, and I volunteered, finally getting my shot. It was a few minutes on screen, but I learned to ride horses, to do fight scenes. I was always the first to arrive, the last to leave. There was one time I fell off a horse while riding, but I overcame my fear and picked up the skill again. Despite the bruises, I still felt that those were the happiest moments of my life. Chapter 12. Ryan often came to the film set to watch me. "Superstar. You'll soon be an international sensation." Between filming breaks, I wiped the sweat from my forehead and playfully bantered with him. Not so fast. I just want to make more money. As the director shouted action, I immediately mounted the horse again and galloped forward. While riding, all I could feel was the freedom. This was the real me, not constrained by anyone or anything. I no longer had to feel guilty or try to please anyone. In a moment of triumph, I lost my balance and almost fell off the horse. This time, I steadied myself, placed my feet firmly in the stirrups, straightened up, and took control of the horse. The director recorded everything, capturing a classic moment. When I dismounted, the whole crew erupted in applause. Ryan watched me with a hint of concern in his eyes, his gaze filled with pity. If I had the status and wealth, you wouldn't have to take such dangerous jobs. I didn't respond, simply wiping my sweat with a calm expression. This is my career, and I take pride in it. Ryan was the owner of a small internet company. In reality, he was already very successful. Do you plan to return to China someday? Of course. I'm not hiding from anyone. He paused for a moment and leaned closer to me. When do you plan to go back? Once I have some international recognition. I seized this opportunity and knew I couldn't let it go. Whether I was really cut out for this industry, I wasn't sure at first. But here, I could experiment without relying on someone else's resources. I would find out if I could succeed. He glanced at my waist, clearly concerned. Don't keep pushing yourself. I saw it earlier. Your waist is hurt. Are you sure you're not doing all this just to prove something to him? Won't he notice you? I hadn't expected him to think this way. I mischievously answered him. Don't worry, he never looks at entertainment news. Ryan stood up, his expression serious, and his gaze fixed on me. Well then, what about me? Chapter 13. Unfortunately, things didn't go the way he hoped. I laughed loudly, awkwardly demonstrating how uncomfortable the moment was. I was afraid of losing my only friend, so I nudged him with my elbow, teasing him. Are you sure your mom would approve? He fell silent. You've done so much for me, and I'm really grateful. Ryan, this man, who came from the slums and worked his way up to being a boss, was his mother's greatest pride. She hoped he would go back soon and marry into a well-established family. There was no way she'd ever approve of him being with someone like me. I knew this because one day, after we finished our homework together, his mother called me aside. Her words were simple, but they stung deep. She said, Luna, you know people like us. The only way into high society is through education or marriage. You're not good enough for him. Don't ruin his future. Even now, as a celebrity, I still wasn't in the Lee family's consideration. So, I only saw him as a role model and a friend. Nothing more. But my hard work eventually paid off, and I didn't have to wait long for results. The next year, a film featuring a Chinese lead required a young woman who could ride horses and fight. The crew unanimously recommended me. I began preparing for the audition 6 months in advance, and sure enough, the opportunity came my way. This was the best script a Chinese actress could hope for. The lead character had experienced dramatic ups and downs in her life, repeatedly rising from the depths. It was a role that seemed to mirror my own life. On the day of the audition, I tied my hair up in a high ponytail, giving off a sense of perseverance. The director immediately took an interest in me. On the first day of filming, I spotted a familiar face on set. She was wearing a crop top, a mini skirt, and the same embroidered moon shirt. She raised her hand and waved at me, calling out, Luna. For a moment, it felt like I was reliving the past. Chapter 14. Ms. Sue. Hello. She was pleased that I recognized her and, without any hesitation, proudly showed off her outfit. Looks like you do remember me. I purposely wore the airport clothes. Afraid you'd forget. Sorry. I just found out you're the one he's in love with. Her words made my face change. I didn't know whether it was a provocation or a polite remark. Mrs. Sue, you're mistaken. I'm not anyone's sweetheart. She walked around me in a circle, then shrugged. You're mistaken too. I'm not a married woman. I'm single. Seeing that I didn't get the point, she casually sat down on a stool. Didn't you tell him that I was having an affair? Since you know we're not married, why don't you just go back? I remained silent, unsure of her intention. I didn't even know if they were married. I remember he didn't believe me when I told him. Bianca wasn't upset. I made her a cup of coffee and handed it over. As you can see, this is my territory. I'm not planning to go back just yet. She stretched out her long legs, sipped the coffee, and gazed at the blue sky with a look of contentment. It's no wonder you don't want to go back. This place is beautiful. He wasn't ready for marriage. Looking for you for 2 years. Too bad I know all about it from entertainment news. He thinks it's all trash, so he won't read it. Otherwise, he'd have found you. So, his world only revolves around him. His so-called search for me is just self-comfort. Exactly. Did you come to see me for something? She gently rocked the stool, her eyes gleaming with a critical look. I want to see what kind of person can make him stand up to the Liu family. Do you know? People like us, from families like ours, are predetermined from birth. You're the only act of rebellion in his life. He thought he kept you hidden well. Thought that as long as the family didn't know, you two could last. Chapter 15. She seemed a little smug, covering her mouth as she laughed at Gabriel across the ocean. What a shame, though. He pushed her away. All for nothing. He went mad searching for you. But the Liu family found out about you anyway. Bianca propped her chin in her hands, her eyes sparkling with a mischievous glint. The Liu family doesn't tolerate idle people. If they're looking for you, it means there's no resources to offer. Do you think he can handle that? I finally understood her intention. It was a nasty kind of pleasure, like watching a tragic soap opera. She just wanted to see Gabriel suffer, wanted to watch me writhing in regret and longing to go back. But that wasn't me. I sat with her, drinking coffee. He is my benefactor. When I left, I decided to leave him to you, whether you want him or not. That's not my concern. Bianca clicked her tongue in admiration. Cold-hearted. Huh. Luna, the big star. Actually, he likes you. Ms. Sue. He's just too attached to the pity he feels for someone like me. She didn't argue, just watched me film all day, then left on her own. The following year, thanks to the film, I became internationally famous. I gained a fan base, from being a little beggar to an international superstar. And for the past 3 years, a company in my home country kept sending me offers. It was both amusing and frustrating. I had no idea how I had attracted their attention, nor how they knew my whereabouts or that I would eventually return. Every month, they sent me a letter to my apartment. Each letter outlined their advantages and the boss's determination. After receiving the award this time, they once again showered me with praise. Finally, I couldn't resist and decided to go back to see who was so eager to have me. Ryan was going back with me. Chapter 16. He planned to return to the country to start a business and, at the same time, persuade his mother to approve of our relationship. Heh. Stop pretending, okay? We're brothers, comrades in arms. I had already made peace with the situation with him. I didn't expect the boss of this entertainment company to be so childish. At the airport, taking advantage of the crowd of fans, he had someone wait for me with a giant pink plush bow. I almost wanted to turn around and leave, but they quickly grabbed me and stuffed me into a car. Now, everyone knew I had returned to the country and joined Starlight Entertainment. What I didn't expect was that the boss of this company was actually a wealthy bachelor. Not only was he single, but he was also extremely rich, and his background was unknown, and he was a domineering CEO. After signing the contract, the resources he offered me were all major female lead roles with ensemble male casts. None of the scripts had even a scene with the male lead. It made me laugh and cry at the same time. But the scripts he gave me were indeed the best opportunities one could get. I resigned myself and accepted the role. And when the whole country was watching my return, I announced my contract with the new company. People started guessing that I must have gone abroad to build my career, to secure the position of the Starlight CEO's wife. The boss played along, not only liking this speculation but also generously transferring 88,888 yuan to the person who posted it. The fan excitedly displayed the money to everyone, and the news stayed on the trending list for 3 days. I didn't clarify anything since I was part of the company. Creating buzz for the boss was also part of my job. The boss proudly handed out red envelopes every day in the company. Everyone congratulated him on gaining a wife. Reluctantly. I had no choice but to explain. Boss, you're making it harder for yourself to get married. He waved it off carelessly. With you here, who else would I marry? Chapter 17. From the day I returned to the country in such a grand manner, I knew Gabriel would find out. So when he came to see me, I wasn't surprised. My treatment on set had changed drastically from when I left. As a returning international superstar, even if I didn't act like a diva, the director treated me with the utmost care. They were all eager to ask for my opinions, and Gabriel walked over and sat next to the monitor. I glanced at him but kept watching my own mistake on screen, then asked the director if we could do another take. Gabriel seemed a little absent-minded as he watched me concentrate on my work. The director, sensing we had something to talk about, wisely moved to the side and lowered his head to check his phone. When Gabriel spoke, his voice trembled a little. Why did you leave? And why did you come back? I kept my focus on the monitor, not looking at him. I thought seeing him again would feel awkward, but instead, it felt like he was someone I had known in a past life, and the conversation was as easy as talking to a friend. It's simple. I left because I wanted to see the world, and I came back because I had earned enough experience. I was about to call the director over to discuss the script when he asked, his voice low. So, from the beginning to the end, it has nothing to do with me, right? Finally, I allowed myself to look up from the monitor and gave him a fleeting glance. He had become more mature and determined, and there was a hint of loneliness about him. Mr. Liu, when I left, it was to find myself and to repay a debt of gratitude. But if you ever need me in the future, I'll still be willing to return the favor. He suddenly grabbed my wrist, causing the crew to look over in surprise. I struggled desperately for a moment but couldn't free myself. Luna, is this the first time you've met me? Is it really necessary to be so cold toward me? What did I do wrong? At least give me a reason. The person who pulled his hand away was my boss, Domingo, who had a carefree look but radiated a presence that made it clear he was not to be trifled with. Chapter 18. When Gabriel saw Domingo, he froze for a moment and instantly became hostile. Stay away from our Luna. Mr. Liu is already engaged. If you want to pursue someone, go find your fiancée. Don't cause any scandals here. We can't clear them up. Gabriel's face darkened, his gaze fixed on me with intensity. I felt guilty under his stare, so I urged my boss to leave. In my mind, I silently gave the gossipy director a thumbs up for calling him over. Mr. Liu, I don't understand. Our relationship isn't something you can bind forever. Why are you so concerned about my comings and goings? My calm attitude seemed to fluster him even more, pushing him into a panic. He tried to corner me and kiss me, but after so many martial arts scenes, I had learned a few moves. In an instant, I broke free from his hold and even managed to bend him over with a swift counter move. From a distance, Domingo clapped and laughed. Gabriel stood up from my grasp, a bitter smile on his face. 3 years away, and you've learned a lot of tricks. You don't need me anymore. He licked his dry lips. So, can I still win you back? I shook my head, giving him a firm back as I walked away to continue filming. I had the chance to explain, but in the end, I didn't. Once the decision to part ways had been made, there was no need for further explanations. Trying to explain would only lead to endless entanglements and hurt both of us. It was better to be a cold-hearted villain. I lived an isolated life on set. Besides fans, the only visitors were my mom and Ryan's mom. The two old ladies caused a scene at the studio. One accused me of trying to seduce her son, while the other accused me of being ungrateful and not supporting my elders. Domingo's staff immediately kicked them out. When my mom spread rumors online, calling me an ungrateful wolf, I simply used the notarized document she had signed years ago to sever our mother-daughter relationship, silencing the entire internet. Ryan's mom showed up occasionally, scolding me, calling me a seductress, blaming me for ruining her son's future. I frightened the old lady. I wasn't interested in your son to begin with. If you keep bothering me, I might just get interested. She hastily fled the scene. Chapter 19. Gabriel returned to the family and once again brought up his engagement to Bianca. Using the power that the Liu family had restored to him, he publicly began to suppress Domingo's business. I kept apologizing, not expecting Gabriel's childish methods of revenge. Domingo casually propped his feet up on the desk, completely unbothered. It's fine, he's just a dog cornered, trying to jump. As long as you don't run away, he can do whatever he wants. He walked around the desk, still in the mood to joke. Boss lady, if you don't keep up your efforts, our business might go under. Seeing his carefree attitude, I knew he had plenty of money and didn't care about the company at all. At the end of the year, my new movie was released and, as expected, became the biggest hit of the year. Everyone who had been waiting for my return to the country to cause a stir was disappointed. I was still shining in starlight. The plot sparked high levels of discussion, and advertisers scrambled to sponsor it. The company's crisis was easily resolved. During interviews with the press, the boss always maintained a carefree attitude, throwing in some flattery to stop any further probing into my personal life. He'd mentioned the boss lady to lock me down in my role. Privately, I knew he was also helping to suppress my family's revenge on me, for which I was extremely grateful. At the year-end awards, the award I was owed finally came into my hands. A new, up-and-coming actress was in charge of hosting me, and without warning, she provocatively challenged me. Luna, didn't you propose on stage years ago and fail? Who would have thought that after so many years, you ended up with the Best Actress award? I also want to follow your example. Do you think I can win Best Actress too? She didn't gloat for long because the person who came up to present the award to me was Domingo. After handing me the trophy, it was supposed to be my turn to give a speech, but he snatched the microphone away. Leaning slightly forward, he addressed the audience. Several years ago, my fiancé proposed to me here, but I didn't have the strength to stand up and accept. Now, I feel like I've built up enough power. Luna, will you marry me? The proposal from that time was my greatest embarrassment and a thorn in my heart. I was deeply moved that Domingo would help me down from that stage in such a way. I smiled, handed him the microphone, and whispered with my lips, "Are you serious?" He wrapped his arm around my waist and smiled toward the audience. "I'm a serious person, darling." Smile for the people in the audience. From the audience, someone suddenly stood up in a burst of anger, clenching their fists. It was Gabriel. His stand-up attracted everyone's attention. I'm sure tomorrow's headlines will be even more sensational than that day's.